Kansas Territory, May 1871, the wind raced across the tallgrass prairie like it had somewhere angry to be. Ruthie Jennings stood alone beneath the wide sky, her skirts torn where they caught on the wagon wheel when her husband pushed her out. The sound of the wagon fading into the distance was long gone, but she kept staring after it, as if willing it to turn around. It never did. Her hands trembled against her sides. She had not cried when he grabbed her arm, not when he yelled in front of the children. Not when he left her here with nothing but a threadbare shawl and the ache of betrayal. But now, in the silence, she dropped to her knees in the dirt and let the tears come. "Ma," her little boy's voice cracked through her heart. Elijah was 5, his shirt too big, hand clutching his baby sister's, who was only 3. Rosie kept rubbing her eyes like she was too tired to understand what had happened. "We're all right," Ruthie whispered, pulling them close, kissing their heads. "I've got you." "We're all right." But they were not all right, not with no food, no water, no sign of another soul in sight. The prairie stretched around them in every direction, golden waves of grass, the occasional cottonwood, and the sky so wide it made her feel small enough to vanish. She did not know how long she sat there, her arms around her children, their small bodies pressed into her sides. Long enough for the wind to dry her tears, long enough for Rosie to fall asleep in her lap, long enough for her to feel the hopelessness start to settle in her bones. Then, like a whisper turned into thunder, the sound of hooves broke through the hush. Ruthie stiffened. Her arms tightened around Elijah and Rosie. A man on horseback was coming from the west, a lone figure cutting across the tallgrass, moving fast. She stood up, legs unsteady. The rider slowed when he spotted them. Dust swirled behind his horse as he came closer. He pulled up just a few paces away and dismounted in a fluid swing, his boots crunching the dry grass. His shirt was worn but clean, his hat shadowing his face. He looked like he had been riding for days, trail-worn, lean, sun-browned. He took off his hat. "You all right, ma'am?" Ruthie opened her mouth, then closed it. Her voice would not come. She just shook her head, his gaze shifted to the children, then back to her. "Did someone leave you out here?" Her throat caught. "My husband, he said he was done with us. Took the wagon, rode off." The man's jaw tightened. He looked down at the children, then back at her. "Name's Elias Sutton." "That your wagon trail I saw a few miles back," she nodded, still holding Rosie with one arm. "I got a canteen." Elias unstrapped it from his saddle and stepped closer, slow and careful, like he knew he looked like a stranger and did not want to scare her. He handed it over. "There's more in my pack. I got biscuits too." Ruthie took the canteen, her fingers brushing his. He was solid, real, not another ghost of hope come to taunt her. "Thank you," she whispered. She helped Elijah drink first, then Rosie. Only after they were settled in the shade of a nearby cottonwood did she take a sip herself. Elias crouched nearby, eyes scanning the horizon. "You got any folks nearby?" "No," she said. "We were headed west, California. He said we'd start over, but he got angry, said I was too much trouble." Said the children held him back. Elias's face darkened. "He left you out here alone with 2 babies, Ruthie nodded. "Said I'd figure it out." He looked at her for a long moment, then stood. "You are not staying out here. You and the little ones come with me. I have a place 2 days west. Creek runs beside it. Small cabin, not much, but it is safe." She hesitated. "Why would you help us?" He looked down at her, something quiet and steady in his gaze. "Because no woman deserves to be left like this, especially not with children to protect." Ruthie's lip trembled. She looked down at Elijah, who was watching Elias with wide eyes, and at Rosie, curled against her. "All right," she said softly. "We'll go with you." Elias smiled, just slightly. "Good. I got a blanket for the little ones. You ride with me. We will take it slow." He helped her onto his horse, then lifted the children one by one into her arms. Rosie nestled against Ruthie's chest. Elijah clung to her waist, watching Elias with quiet awe. Elias walked beside the horse for the first stretch, leading them through the tall grass, always glancing up to check on them. The sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long golden shadows. The prairie no longer felt so endless. Not with the steady rhythm of hoofbeats, not with the man walking beside her who did not ask for anything, who just kept them moving forward. That night they camped near a stream. Elias made a small fire and gave them dried apples and flapjacks from his saddlebag. He let Elijah sit beside him while he cooked, showing him how to toast bread on a stick. Ruthie watched them, her heart aching in a new way. Not from fear or grief, but something gentler, something she had not felt in years. After the children were asleep, curled up in the blanket, Elias sat across from her by the fire. "You are strong," he said quietly. "You do not even know it yet." She stared into the flames. "I feel broken." "You are not. You were just handed something cruel." "That is not the same thing." She looked over at him. "Why are you being so kind?" Elias's eyes met hers. "Because you deserve it." The fire crackled between them. The prairie wind had settled. For the first time in days, maybe weeks, Ruthie felt something that almost resembled peace. And when Elias stood and offered her his hand, just to help her to her feet, she took it without hesitation. That night she slept with the children nestled close, Elias only a few feet away, keeping watch. The stars stretched above them, and for the first time since being left behind, Ruthie did not feel abandoned. She felt found. The second morning broke gray and hushed, the sky smudged with high clouds that dulled the sun. Elias stirred the coals from their small fire, coaxing enough heat to warm the leftover biscuits. Ruthie sat nearby with Rosie still drowsing in her lap, Elijah poking a twig into the soft earth beside her. Elias passed her a biscuit without a word. She accepted it, careful not to wake the child balanced against her chest. The quiet between them wasn't strained, it felt like something living, something growing roots. As Elijah wandered to the stream's edge, Elias crouched beside his saddlebag and drew out a folded square of canvas. "We'll reach the cabin before dusk if we keep steady," he said. "You'll want rest between now and then. There's a rise ahead where the wind won't cut as sharp. Thought we'd stop there midday." Ruthie nodded once. "Thank you." He glanced at her, then looked away as he stood. "I had a sister. Younger, sickly most her life. I did what I could for her, but she passed before I ever made enough money to get her proper care." Ruthie blinked. His voice hadn't changed pitch, but the grief in it was plain, worn into the words like scuffs in leather. "She had a look like you," he added. Strong in the eyes even when she was hurting. Ruthie didn't answer right away. She watched Elijah crouch at the water, dipping his hand in and flicking droplets toward a curious bird. "I haven't felt strong in a long time." Elias didn't argue with her. He just secured the saddle, checked the cinch, and said, "Let's get you home." The ride that day was quieter than the last. Rosie slept most of it, wrapped against Ruthie's front. Elijah dozed now and then, his head on her shoulder. Ruthie had never ridden horseback for more than a few miles in her life, certainly never carrying both children, but Elias paced them slow, never letting the horse strain. He led by the reins, mostly silent, except when he'd point out a break in the trees or a creek bed where deer had come through. Around midday, they reached a low hill where the grass grew shorter and the wind softened. Elias helped Ruthie down, then lifted the children gently. Rosie stirred and clung to her mother's skirts, blinking sleepily. Elijah stayed close to Elias, shadowing his steps as he unpacked a tin of beans and a strip of salted pork. "You ever teach him to fish?" Elias asked as he knelt by the stream. Ruthie shook her head. "We were always moving. There wasn't time for much. I'll show him sometime." "If you'd like." She didn't answer right away. She sat with Rosie beneath a cottonwood and brushed a curl from the girl's brow. When she did speak, her voice was low. "He hasn't had much of a childhood." Elias looked over at Elijah, who had picked up a smooth stone and was studying it with complete focus. "Maybe he still can." They ate in the soft shade. Rosie sat on Ruthie's lap, chewing slowly. Elijah perched beside Elias, watching him with quiet admiration as he cleaned the tin and packed it away neatly. Afterward, Ruthie walked a little ways alone while Elias watched the children. The prairie wasn't endless here. Trees thickened in the distance, and a stand of cottonwoods marked the bend in the stream. She knelt and ran her hand through the tall grass. A beetle crawled, and she watched it without moving. When she returned, Elias was sitting cross-legged, Elijah asleep against his side. "You all right?" he asked. "I forgot what quiet felt like," she said, settling beside him. "Not the kind that comes from being alone. The good kind." He gave a slight nod, then stood and dusted off his trousers. "We should press on. Cabin's a few hours still." They rode on under a sky that never quite cleared, the clouds hanging like wool above them. As the trees thickened, the air cooled. The land sloped gently upward, then flattened into a small hollow ringed by cedar and pine. A narrow creek ran through it, shallow and clear, and beyond that stood a modest log cabin with a stone chimney and a lean-to shelter for the horse. Elias reached up and took Rosie from Ruthie's arms, then helped Elijah down. "It ain't fancy," he said, "but it's warm and dry." Ruthie stepped down, her knees stiff. "You built this, some of it. Some was here before." He led them across the clearing. The door opened with a soft creak, and the scent of pine wood and cold ash drifted out. Inside, the floor was packed earth near the door, worn smooth by boots. A small table stood beneath the window, and there was a bed frame in the corner with a thick quilt folded neatly at the foot. Ruthie hovered near the door. "Where will you sleep?" Elias set Rosie down on the bed and pulled a pallet from the corner. "Out here by the hearth. I've done it before." She met his eyes. "You don't have to, I do," he said gently. "Not because I think you're weak, because you need rest. Your children need to see you safe." The words caught something in her chest. She looked away quickly and busied herself with removing Rosie's shoes. Later, after they ate, a stew Elias put together from dried meat and wild onion, the children curled up on the bed and fell into a deep sleep. Elias sat near the cold hearth, sharpening his knife with slow, methodical strokes. Ruthie lingered at the table, oiling the cracked leather of her boots with a cloth he'd given her. She didn't look up as she spoke. "I don't know how to be anything but someone's wife." Elias set the knife aside. "You don't have to be anyone but yourself here," she swallowed, her hands stilled. "I don't know who that is anymore." He didn't offer comfort or platitudes. He just said, "Then we'll figure it out, one day at a time." She looked at him then, really looked. His face was plain, not handsome in the way that turned heads, but there was a steadiness in it that made her feel like she could breathe. "Thank you," she said, and didn't look away this time. Elias nodded once. "You're welcome, Ruthie." Outside, the wind moved through the trees, low and constant. Inside, the cabin was still. The fire hadn't been lit, but the space felt warm all the same. By the third morning, the cabin had taken on a quiet rhythm. Elias rose early, stepping outside before the sun cleared the treetops, and Ruthie heard the low murmur of him speaking to the horse, the scrape of a pail against the wellstone. She stayed in bed a while longer, watching the soft light creep across the wall, Rosie's breath slow and even against her shoulder. She dressed quietly, careful not to wake the children. Elijah had kicked the quilt down in the night, and she tucked it back over him before stepping outside. Elias stood near the lean-to, sleeves rolled up, shirt damp with morning dew. He was rinsing a strip of cloth in a tin basin, hands moving with a practiced ease. A splintered fence post leaned against the side of the structure, and several more lay nearby. "You're fixing the corral?" she asked, pulling her shawl tighter. "I aim to keep a few goats come summer," he said without turning, "but the fence won't hold much more than wind just now." She stepped off the porch and joined him. "I can take the children to the stream." "Let them wash up, stretch their legs." "They'll like that," he said. "Water's cold, not deep this time of year," she nodded. "I'll bring a tin for scrubbing." Elias paused, then looked at her. "You slept." "For the most part," she said. "Rosie kicks," his eyes softened. "She's small for her age. She's always been quiet. Elijah talks enough for both of them." Elias let out a small breath that was almost a laugh, then turned back to his work. Ruthie left him to it. By late morning, the children had been washed and bundled back into dry clothes. Elijah chased a grasshopper along the creek bank while Ruthie wrung out Rosie's dress and laid it across a sun-warmed rock. The girl sat beside her, drawing shapes in the mud with a stick. "You're not afraid." Elijah said suddenly, glancing at her from across the trickle of water. Ruthie looked up. Of what? He shrugged, then frowned. Of being here with him? She set down the dress, meeting his gaze. Do you feel afraid? He shook his head, then looked away. He doesn't yell. No, she said. He doesn't. They stayed by the water until Rosie's dress dried, then returned to the cabin. Elijah carried a bundle of twigs, and Rosie a single smooth stone she'd refused to part with. Elias had cleared the front patch of weeds and laid out a row of flat stones, forming a path from the cabin to the well. He looked up as they approached, wiping his hands on his trousers. I thought we could start a garden, he said. I've got seed in the cellar, not much variety but enough to get by. Ruthie blinked, then glanced at the tilled soil. You mean for us, he nodded. You've got a right to plant your own food. She stepped forward, studying the space. Where do you keep the tools? He pointed to a shed near the trees. There's a spade and a hoe, needs sharpening. I can manage that, she said. Elias met her gaze. You don't have to prove yourself here. I'm not, she said quietly. I just want to work. That afternoon, they turned soil together while the children napped. Ruthie's palms blistered before the hour was out, but she didn't stop. Elias worked beside her, not rushing, not correcting. When the blade of the hoe caught on a buried rock, he pried it loose and set it aside without comment. At dusk, she sat on the porch steps with her hands wrapped in a damp cloth. The air smelled of pine sap and tilled earth. Inside, Rosie slept curled against Elijah's side, both children worn from the day. Elias came up the steps with 2 tin cups. He handed her one, then sat beside her. The drink was weak chicory, warm and bitter. I'll show you where the cellar sits tomorrow, he said. We've got sacks of oats and a barrel of cornmeal, enough to last a while. She nodded, sipping slowly. You live quiet. It's how I prefer it. She glanced sideways, studying the slope of his shoulders, the calm set of his jaw. You ever marry? No. Why not? He turned the cup in his hands. Didn't see the point of dragging someone into a half-finished life, never stayed in one place long enough before. She looked out across the clearing. The trees swayed gently in the wind, their leaves just starting to bud. Do you want to stay now? I think I do, he said. They sat with that truth between them, not heavy, not rushed, just there. What about you? He asked. She didn't answer right away. I don't know what I want yet, but I want to stop running, Elias nodded. Then start here. As long as you need. The sky deepened to indigo, a whippoorwill called from the trees. Ruthie leaned back slightly, the cup warm between her palms. I was afraid I'd lost every good thing in me, she said, voice low. You didn't, Elias replied. It's still there. Just bruised. She turned to him then, not with uncertainty but with something quieter, trust built slowly, not handed over all at once. You're not what I expected, I know, he said. Neither are you. He didn't reach for her hand, didn't need to. The nearness was enough. And in the hush that followed, Ruthie felt something shift inside her, not a sudden healing, but the start of something steady, like a fence being mended, like soil being turned, like a life beginning again. The next week brought a slow bloom of color across the meadow beyond the cabin, purple larkspur, yellow coneflower, and the first tender shoots from the garden rose Elias and Ruthie had planted. Days stretched long, the kind that left muscles aching and minds quiet. Ruthie fell into the rhythm of it without ceremony, kneading cornmeal into flatbread, airing linens, hauling water, brushing tangles from Rosie's hair while Elijah counted birds overhead. Elias was gone before dawn each morning, tending to boundary traps and checking the fence line deeper in the woods. By the time Ruthie stepped outside with a tin pail, he'd return with something useful: a rabbit, a clutch of eggs, fallen wood stacked across one shoulder. He never made mention of what she did or didn't finish, only offered a nod, a soft morning, and set to whatever the day required. This morning, he lingered longer at the well, wiping sweat from his brow with the back of his hand. Ruthie rinsed a cloth in the basin and wrung it out beside him. I found a patch of wild mint near the creek, she said. Thought I might dry some for tea. He looked at her from beneath his brim. You know your way around plants. I was raised by a woman who did, my aunt. She kept a book of pressed leaves and notes. I remember most of it. Still have the book, she shook her head. Left behind in Arkansas, took what I could carry, which wasn't much. Elias leaned against the well post. You ever think about teaching Elijah and Rosie that sort of thing? I have, she said. He's curious about everything. She's quiet but sees more than she lets on, he nodded. It'd be good for them, knowing how to make use of what grows nearby. She dipped the cloth again and pressed it to the back of her neck. I wouldn't mind teaching you too. That made him smile, not wide, just enough to crease the corner of his eyes. I'd like that. Later, while Elijah gathered pebbles near the stream and Rosie napped under a quilt on the porch, Ruthie sat beside Elias and showed him how to crush mint between his fingers, how to tell it from nettle by the tooth of its leaves. Most folks pass a thing by without looking at it twice, she said, but plants'll tell you what they are if you're patient. He studied the leaves in his palm. You always talk like that. Like what? Like you're listening to more than what's being said, she shrugged. I had to. There wasn't anyone else listening for me. He turned his hand over, letting the crushed mint fall. There is now. She didn't speak. Her throat tightened too much for words. Instead, she leaned forward and gathered the rest of the sprigs into her apron, fingers trembling just enough for him to notice. That evening they sat behind the cabin after the children were asleep. A lantern flickered low inside, and the air was thick with the scent of cedar smoke. Ruthie sat on a stump, sleeves rolled to her elbows, the dried mint bundled in her lap. Elias sat across from her, sharpening a spade edge with steady strokes. The scrape of stone against metal was rhythmic, grounding. You ever think of leaving Kansas? She asked. He paused, then set the spade aside. I did once, rode as far as Wyoming territory, thought I'd try my hand at mining, didn't last, too many men chasing empty things. What made you come back? He shrugged. Couldn't sleep right without trees nearby. Couldn't breathe for the dust. She watched him in the dusk. Do you sleep easy now? He met her gaze. I do. She folded the bundle of mint and set it aside. I never trusted quiet men before. Why not? They always seemed like they were hiding something, and me, you feel like you're keeping something safe, not hiding it. He rose slowly, crossed the short distance to her. Ruthie, he said, voice low. She stood without thinking, drawn by something steady and certain. The silence between them wasn't empty, it was full, like earth packed beneath roots. His hand brushed her cheek, not a claiming touch, just a question. She pressed into it, eyes closed. I'm not broken anymore, she whispered. No, he said, you're whole, you always were. She leaned in then, their foreheads touching, breath mingling in the still air. It wasn't hunger that passed between them, it was relief, recognition, the quiet promise of something lasting. When she stepped back, her fingers lingered in his. Come inside, she said. He didn't ask if she was sure. He didn't need to. The wood stove crackled low as the last embers settled behind the iron grate, casting a faint glow that touched the cabin's worn floorboards. Ruthie moved quietly, drawing the heavy curtain closed across the window while Elias checked the latch on the door. Outside, the moon hung low and full, pale light filtering through the trees and laying silver across the clearing. She turned as he stepped away from the door, and for a moment neither of them said anything. The stillness between them was not uncertainty, it was reverence. They had crossed through something that could not be undone, not with silence and not with time. I left Arkansas with a bruised rib and a broken tooth, she said, her voice steady. He never hit the children, but he made sure I knew my place. Took near a year before I stopped flinching when someone raised their voice. Elias didn't interrupt. He stood with his hands at his sides, listening as if her words were something sacred. Ruthie stepped toward him, her fingers brushing her collarbone. I want you to know what you're holding, Elias. I've been patched together, and I don't want to be pitied. I don't, he said. That's not what this is, she nodded once. Then you can stay. His eyes searched hers. I was never planning to leave. She reached up, her palm resting lightly against his chest. His heart beat slow and even beneath her fingers. I'm not afraid with you, he covered her hand with his. You shouldn't be. That night, neither of them held back. There was no pretense, no uncertainty, no rush, just two people who had known silence and hardship, who now moved together with care and understanding. When dawn came, the light found them still wrapped in each other, the weight of grief and abandonment finally softened by something real. In the days that followed, the bond between them deepened in ways that didn't need naming. Ruthie began sketching again rough pencil drawings of the creek, the cabin, the children's hands. Elias built a small table beside the garden for her to work on, plant seed rows and dry herbs. She didn't ask for it, and he didn't mention it once it was done. Elijah took to following Elias on his morning rounds, learning the signs of rabbit trail and broken twig. Elias showed him how to move quiet through the brush, how to tell a healthy animal from a sick one. Ruthie watched from the porch as Elijah came home each time with his chin a little higher. Rosie took to the herb bundles Ruthie hung from the rafters, pointing and naming what she could. One morning, Ruthie found her humming to herself while she arranged sprigs of yarrow on a cloth. Ruthie knelt beside her, kissed her curls, and whispered, "You're going to be good at this." One afternoon, Elias came back from the woods with a scrap of canvas wrapped tight. He handed it to Ruthie without explanation. Inside was a leather-bound book, the edges worn, the pages thin with age. She opened it and gasped softly. Pressed flowers, ink-stained notes, careful sketches in a woman's looping hand. "My sister's," Elias said. "She had no children. I think she'd want her book in your hands." Ruthie sat down slowly, the weight of it almost too much. "I'll take care of it." He knelt beside her, his hand warm on her knee. "I know." That night she made a stew from wild greens and dried beans, and they ate by lantern light, Elijah telling a story about a squirrel that had stolen his bootlace. Rosie laughed until she hiccuped. After the children were tucked in, Ruthie and Elias sat on the porch beneath a sky scattered with stars. She leaned against him, her head resting beneath his chin. "I want to stay here," she said softly. "Start a school next spring, just for the children nearby. I can teach letters, keep them safe for a few hours a day." Elias pressed a kiss to her hair. "We'll build it, whatever you need." She looked up at him. "And you, what do you want?" He thought for a moment, then said, "A quiet life, good work, laughter in the house, and you, Ruthie." "Every day." She reached for his hand, threading her fingers through his. "Then that's what we'll have." They were married before the frost came. Not in a church, there wasn't one within 20 miles, but under the tall cottonwood by the creek, with Elijah carrying a bundle of wildflowers and Rosie clutching Ruthie's hand. A traveling minister came through with a mule and a dry voice, but his words were clear and binding. Elias built a second bed frame, smaller, for the children, and Ruthie made quilts from her old dresses and scraps of Elias's shirts. The cabin filled slowly with warmth baskets, tools, books, laughter, and the quiet sounds of people who were no longer waiting for their lives to start. Through winter, they read by firelight, traded eggs with neighbors, and fashioned toys from scraps of wood. Ruthie kept the school dream close, drawing plans and gathering pages. Elias made shelves for her books and carved Rosie a set of wooden animals. By spring, the garden bloomed in full rows. The fence held. The creek ran high and clear. One morning, Ruthie stood at the edge of the porch, sunlight spilling across the clearing, her hand resting lightly on the curve of her belly. Elias came up behind her, wrapped his arms around her waist. "You all right?" he asked. She nodded, smiling. "I'm more than all right." He kissed her temple, then rested his chin on her shoulder. "We're gonna be just fine." And they were. Ruthie Jennings Sutton never ran again. She taught reading, grew herbs, raised 3 children who knew the names of every bird in the trees. And Elias built her everything she dreamed, one nail, one board, one day at a time. They aged beneath the same sky that once looked too wide to cross. And they loved each other with a quiet, enduring strength that needed no declaration, only presence, care, and the promise, kept every day, to never leave.